The crystal vase hit the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot, exploding into 1,000 glittering pieces that scattered across the pristine white foyer. Isabella didn't flinch. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hands folded calmly in front of her cream silk blouse, watching as her husband's rage painted the elegant space with destruction. 3 years! Diego Rivera's voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings, his face flushed red with fury. 3 years I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me? By embarrassing me in front of my clients? Isabella's dark brown skin seemed to glow against the white marble and gold fixtures of the mansion's interior. Her natural hair was pulled back into a low bun, elegant and simple, framing a face that remained eerily composed despite the chaos unfolding below her. She said nothing, which only seemed to fuel Diego's rage further. He grabbed the Louis Vuitton suitcase from the nearby closet and hurled it down the stairs. It tumbled end over end, hitting each marble step with a heavy thud before coming to rest at the bottom, its contents spilling across the foyer. A silk scarf floated down like a surrender flag. "Pack your things," Diego shouted, his voice cracking with the force of his anger. "Pack every single thing you own and get out. I want you gone before I return tonight, Isabella. Do you hear me? Every trace of you erased from my house." He grabbed another bag, this one a designer weekender, and threw it with even more force. It crashed into a side table, sending a lamp toppling to the floor. Isabella descended 3 steps, moving with a grace that seemed to infuriate Diego even more. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, measured, almost gentle. "Diego, please calm down. We can discuss whatever happened at dinner like adults." "Discuss?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "There's nothing to discuss. You made me look like a fool, sitting there at dinner with the Herreras, barely saying 2 words, looking bored while I'm trying to close a deal. Do you have any idea how much money was on that table?" "I wasn't feeling well," Isabella said. "I told you that before we left." "You're never feeling well. You're never interested. You're never anything but a weight around my neck." Diego kicked at one of the fallen bags, sending clothes scattering further across the marble. "I should have listened to my mother. She warned me about marrying beneath myself." Something flickered in Isabella's eyes, so brief it might have been imagined, before her calm mask returned. She continued down the stairs, her bare feet making no sound on the cold marble. "Don't you dare walk away from me when I'm talking to you," Diego snarled. "I'm not walking away. I'm coming down to help clean up this mess. The only mess that needs cleaning up is you." He pointed toward the massive front door, his finger shaking with rage. "You have until sunset. I'm taking Carmen to dinner, and when I come back, I don't want to see your face or anything that belongs to you. Understood?" Isabella stopped halfway down the staircase. "Carmen?" Diego's expression shifted from rage to something crueler, more calculated. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, Carmen. My assistant. The woman who actually appreciates what I do for her. Who doesn't sit at business dinners like a statue. Who knows how to be grateful." Through the tall windows flanking the front door, Isabella could see a silver Mercedes idling in the circular driveway. A young woman sat in the passenger seat, checking her makeup in the visor mirror, her red lips curved in a satisfied smile. "I see," Isabella said softly. "Do you? Do you finally see?" Diego climbed 3 steps toward her, close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne he wore, the same scent she used to find comforting but now made her stomach turn. "You have nothing, Isabella. No job, no money, no family that can help you. Where are you going to go? Back to that cramped little apartment your mother lives in? Back to that sad little nonprofit you used to work at? Begging for your job back?" He was so close now she could see the veins pulsing in his neck, the red spreading across his cheeks, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched with each word. "You should be on your knees thanking me for these 3 years," he hissed. "Living in this mansion, wearing designer clothes, eating at the best restaurants. You're a nobody from nowhere, and I made you into somebody, and this is how you repay me." Isabella looked into his eyes, those dark brown eyes she'd once thought were warm and kind, and saw nothing but contempt. She thought back to the night they'd met 3 years ago at a charity gala. She'd been there working, or so he'd believed, helping to coordinate a fundraising event for a nonprofit supporting underprivileged youth. He'd approached her at the bar, confident and charming, and introducing himself as Diego Rivera, owner of Rivera Property Management. She remembered being struck by his attention, the way he'd pursued her so intensely over the following weeks. Flowers delivered to the nonprofit office, surprise lunches, invitations to elegant dinners. He'd seemed so different from the men she'd grown up around, so eager to please, so attentive. When had that changed? When had the attentive suitor become this stranger who looked at her with such disdain? Maybe it had never changed. Maybe this was who Diego had always been, and she'd simply been unwilling to see it. As you wish, Diego, Isabella said, her voice steady and clear. I'll be gone by sunset. He blinked, clearly surprised by her compliance. He'd expected tears, begging, pleading. Instead, she simply looked at him with those calm, knowing eyes that suddenly made him deeply uncomfortable, though he couldn't say why. Good, he said, recovering his bravado. Make sure you don't take anything that doesn't belong to you. I'll have my lawyer inventory everything. Of course, she replied. Diego turned and descended the stairs, his Italian leather shoes crunching over broken crystal. He paused at the door, looking back up at her. You know, I actually feel sorry for you. You had a good thing here, and you threw it away. Then he was gone, the heavy door slamming behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty foyer. Isabella watched through the window as he climbed into the Mercedes, as Carmen leaned over to kiss him before he'd even fully settled in his seat, as the car pulled away down the long tree-lined driveway. Only when the car disappeared from view did Isabella move. She walked down the remaining stairs, her movement still calm and unhurried, and stepped carefully around the broken crystal and scattered belongings. She made her way to the kitchen, a massive space with marble countertops and state-of-the-art appliances, and picked up her phone from where it was charging on the island. She pulled up her contacts and selected a number simply labeled Mama. The phone rang once before a warm, strong voice answered. Mi amor, are you all right? Your breathing sounds different. Isabella closed her eyes, allowing herself one moment of vulnerability, one moment where the calm mask could slip. Mama, it's time. Execute the plan. There was a pause, then a long exhale. You're sure? Once we start, there's no going back. I'm sure. He just threw me out of the house, literally threw my bags down the stairs. His mistress is waiting in the car. That cerdo. Her mother's voice hardened. How dare he? How dare he treat my daughter this way? Mama, please. We knew this might happen. We've been preparing for this. I know, mija, I know. But knowing and seeing are different things. Are you safe right now? Yes. He's gone for the evening. Said he wants me out by sunset. Then we'll make sure you are. I'm making the calls now. The trucks will be there in 20 minutes. Miguel is already on his way with the team. By the time Diego returns, he'll find exactly what he deserves. Nothing. Isabella felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Thank you, Mama. Thank me? Isabella Maria Morales? You're thanking me for protecting you from a man who never deserved you in the first place? Her mother's voice cracked slightly. Your father and I should have ended this charade 2 years ago when we first saw how he treated you. I needed to be sure. I needed to know there was no saving it. And now you know. Now I know. Then let's bring you home, mija. Let's remind this fool exactly who he married and exactly what he's lost. After hanging up, Isabella stood in the kitchen and allowed herself to really look at the space for the first time in months. The custom cabinets she'd selected, the Italian tile she'd chosen, the professional-grade appliances she'd picked out. Diego thought all of this was his, bought with his money, his success, his generosity. He had no idea. She walked through the mansion, through rooms filled with furniture and art and carefully curated beauty. The living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds. The library with its mahogany shelves and leather chairs. The home office where Diego spent hours on phone calls, bragging to his friends about his business deals and his beautiful wife who didn't have to work. If only he knew that every morning when he left for his office, she was on conference calls managing a foundation with assets in 9 figures. That her visits to her mother were actually board meetings and property acquisitions. That the simple nonprofit job he thought she'd left behind was actually her cover for running one of the most influential philanthropic organizations in the state. Isabella climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, stepping over the bags Diego had thrown. She moved to the walk-in closet and pulled out a single small suitcase, black leather and understated. She packed carefully and methodically, a few changes of clothes, her laptop and files from the hidden safe behind a panel in the closet, her mother's pearls, the photo of her father that she kept tucked in a drawer. Everything else could go with the trucks. As she zipped the suitcase closed, she heard the sound of vehicles approaching. She looked out the bedroom window to see a convoy of professional moving trucks pulling up the driveway, followed by a sleek black town car. The trucks bore no company markings, nothing to identify them, just clean white panels that could have belonged to any moving company in the city. The town car parked near the front entrance, and Isabella watched as her cousin Miguel emerged, uh, followed by a team of 6 people in professional attire, all carrying tablets and wearing earpieces. Miguel looked up at the window, and even from this distance, Isabella could see the barely contained fury in his expression. She picked up her suitcase and made her way downstairs. By the time she reached the foyer, Miguel had already let himself in with the key she'd had made for him months ago, when they'd first started planning for this possibility. Prima, Miguel said, pulling her into a tight hug, I'm going to destroy him. We're going to do this legally and properly, Isabella said, pulling back but holding his hands. No deviation from the plan. The plan involves him losing everything he holds dear, so I'm comfortable with that. Miguel looked around the foyer at the broken crystal, the scattered luggage, the clear signs of Diego's violent tantrum. He did this? This and worse. He threw 3 bags down the stairs, broke a vase, called me names, told me I was nothing, that I had nowhere to go. Miguel's jaw tightened. Did he hurt you physically? No, just the usual verbal abuse. The usual. Miguel shook his head. You should never have had to endure any of this. I know, but it's over now. The team Miguel had brought with him moved through the house with practiced efficiency, tablets out, taking photographs and making notes. One of them, a woman with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes, approached Isabella and Miguel. Miss Morales, I'm Clara Santos, lead coordinator for the extraction. We have 3 hours until sunset based on the timeline you provided. We'll have everything out in 2. The only things we're leaving are items specifically purchased by Mr. Rivera with his own funds, which according to our records is approximately 8% of the contents of this residence. 8%, Isabella repeated. Yes, ma'am. Everything else was either provided by your family trust, purchased with trust funds, or acquired through accounts ultimately controlled by Morales entities. We have documentation for every item. The moving team flooded in, professionals who moved with military precision. They worked in coordinated groups, carefully wrapping and removing furniture, art, fixtures, everything. Isabella watched as the living room was systematically emptied. The custom sofa she'd selected, the coffee table her mother had gifted them, the artwork from her family's collection that she'd loaned to make the house feel like home. One of the movers approached with a question about the dining room chandelier. Ma'am, this piece, do we remove it? Check the purchase records, Clara instructed. The mover tapped on his tablet. Purchased by Elena Morales in 2019, installed in 2022 after renovations. Then yes, it comes with us. Isabella watched as they carefully lowered the massive crystal chandelier, the same one she and Diego had argued about when they first moved in. He'd wanted something modern and minimalist. She'd insisted on this one, a family heirloom that had hung in her grandmother's house. He'd eventually agreed, thinking it was a replica she'd found at a discount store, never bothering to have it appraised, never knowing it was worth more than his car. Miguel stood beside her, making notes on his tablet. The eviction notice will be served tonight at 8 p.m. I have a process server standing by. The property management company will change the locks at 8:30. Diego will have 72 hours to remove his personal belongings and only his personal belongings under supervision. And the business contracts? Already terminated as of 5 p.m. today. All 3 major accounts he was counting on for next quarter. Without them, Rivera Property Management will be operating at a significant loss within 30 days. The investors? Pulling out starting tomorrow morning. We've coordinated the timing. By noon tomorrow, he'll have received notice from all 5 major investors that they're withdrawing their capital. Isabella nodded. Watching as movers carried out the dining room table, the same table where Diego had hosted countless dinner parties, preening and showing off, never knowing that half his guests were only there because of connections to Isabella's family. The prenup? She asked quietly. Miguel's smile was sharp. A work of art, even if I do say so myself. Every clause designed to protect you, though he was too arrogant to have his own lawyer review it properly. The infidelity provision alone is going to cost him everything he thinks he owns. And Carmen? Will testify to everything as agreed. She's been thorough in her documentation. Diego has no idea that his confidant has been reporting directly to our legal team for the past 8 months. Isabella had suspected Diego's affair long before they'd confirmed it. The late nights, The unexplained absences, the way he'd pulled away from her emotionally while simultaneously becoming more controlling of her time and activities. When she'd mentioned it to Miguel, he'd suggested they turn the situation to their advantage. Carmen, it turned out, was an aspiring law student drowning in debt. The offer had been simple: document everything, report regularly, and the Morales Foundation would cover her law school tuition and guarantee her a position after graduation. Carmen had agreed without hesitation. By 6:30, the house was nearly empty. Rooms that had been filled with warmth and beauty now echoed with absence. The movers had left behind only the items Diego had personally purchased: a leather recliner he'd bought against Isabella's wishes, an ugly modern sculpture he'd insisted on displaying in the entry, a few electronics, some workout equipment in the garage. Everything else was gone. Clara approached Isabella with a tablet. "Final inventory is complete, Miss Morales. Everything is accounted for and loaded. We'll have it all in secure storage by 9 p.m. Would you like to do a final walkthrough?" Isabella moved through the empty house, her footsteps echoing on bare floors. Without furniture, without art, without life, the mansion looked cold and hollow. She thought about the first time Diego had brought her here, how excited he'd been to show her his home, how proud he'd been of what he'd achieved. He'd never achieved any of it. He'd simply been living in a stage set designed by her family, playing a role he didn't know had been written for him. She stopped in the master bedroom, looking at the empty space where their bed had been. How many nights had she lain there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she should just tell him the truth, wondering if knowing who she really was would change him, would make him see her differently, would save their marriage? But she'd known the answer. Diego didn't want a partner. He wanted a possession. He wanted someone he could control, someone who made him feel big by staying small. The truth wouldn't have changed him. It would have only changed which mask he wore. "Ready, Prima?" Miguel asked from the doorway. "Ready," Isabella confirmed. They walked out together, leaving the door unlocked. Clara had left the eviction notice on the floor of the entry, exactly where Diego would see it when he walked in. The document was comprehensive and legally airtight, bearing the seal of the Morales Family Trust and accompanied by property records showing continuous ownership for the past 15 years. The Blacktown car waited in the driveway. Miguel opened the door for Isabella, and she slid into the back seat. As they pulled away, she looked back at the mansion one final time, watching it disappear behind the trees. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Come home, mija. Your room is ready. Your father's waiting to see you." Isabella typed back, "On my way." Then she turned off her phone, leaned her head back against the leather seat, and allowed herself to breathe, really breathe, for the first time in 3 years. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold as they drove away, leaving Diego's fantasy world to collapse in on itself. By the time he returned home to find his empire reduced to rubble, Isabella would be 40 miles away, surrounded by her family, safe in a world Diego had never known existed. A world where she wasn't a nobody from nowhere. A world where her name commanded respect, where her decisions shaped policy, where her voice mattered. The world she'd left behind to test whether Diego loved her or the idea of her. Now she had her answer. Diego Rivera pulled his Mercedes into the circular driveway at 9:45 that evening, 3 hours later than he'd planned. Dinner with Carmen had turned into drinks, which had turned into more drinks, which had turned into Diego holding court at an upscale bar, regaling Carmen and anyone who would listen with stories of his success and his soon-to-be ex-wife's failures. "You should have seen her face," he'd told Carmen over his fourth whiskey. "Like a deer in headlights. She knows she has nowhere to go." Carmen had smiled and nodded, touching his arm at all the right moments, laughing at his jokes, telling him how strong he was, how generous he'd been to tolerate Isabella for so long. It was exactly what Diego needed to hear. Now, as he turned off the engine, he felt satisfied, vindicated even. He'd taken control of his life. He'd finally stood up to Isabella's quiet judgment, her disappointed silences, her way of making him feel small without saying a word. No more walking on eggshells in his own home, no more feeling inadequate. "Do you want me to come in?" Carmen asked, reapplying her lipstick in the visor mirror. "Not tonight," Diego said, kissing her cheek. "Let me make sure she's actually gone first." I'll call you tomorrow." Carmen pouted but didn't argue. She knew her role, knew when to push and when to retreat. "Call me in the morning," she said. "We can celebrate properly." Diego watched her drive away in her little Honda before turning toward his house. His house, his palace, his achievement. Without Isabella's presence poisoning it with her silence and her subtle disapproval, it would finally feel like home. He walked to the front door, fumbling slightly with his keys. The whiskey had made his fingers clumsy, but he managed to unlock the door and push it open. The first thing he noticed was the sound, or rather, the absence of sound. The house was silent in a way it had never been silent before. No hum of the refrigerator, no gentle background music Isabella always had playing, no soft lighting from the lamps she kept on timers. The second thing he noticed was the darkness. He flipped the switch by the door. Nothing happened. "What the hell?" Diego muttered, flipping it again. Still nothing. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the foyer. The beam of light caught something white on the floor. He walked toward it, his expensive shoes echoing strangely on the bare marble. Bare marble. Diego's heart began to race. He looked around wildly, his phone's flashlight revealing an empty space where the console table had been. No mirror above it, no decorative bowl where they kept keys. No umbrella stand. Nothing. He bent down and picked up the white paper on the floor. In the harsh light of his phone, he read the words printed in official legal formatting: Notice of eviction, property of Morales Family Trust. Unauthorized occupant Diego Rivera must vacate premises within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in legal action and forcible removal. Diego read it 3 times, the words refusing to make sense. Morales Family Trust. Isabella's last name was Morales, but this had to be some kind of mistake, some kind of sick joke she was playing. He stumbled forward into the living room, his phone light sweeping across empty walls, bare floors, nothing. The custom sectional sofa was gone, the coffee table was gone. The entertainment center, the art, the lamps, the curtains, everything was gone. "No," Diego whispered. "No, no, no." He ran to the kitchen, his footsteps echoing through the empty house like gunshots. The kitchen was gutted. No refrigerator, no dishwasher, no microwave, no cabinet hardware. Even the chandelier over the island was gone, leaving bare wires hanging from the ceiling. Diego's hands shook as he pulled up his real estate agent's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He tried his lawyer. Same result. He stood in the empty kitchen, his breath coming faster, his mind racing through possibilities. This couldn't be legal. You couldn't just come into someone's house and take everything. This was theft. This was robbery. He'd call the police. He'd have Isabella arrested. But even as the thoughts formed, a cold dread was settling in his stomach. The eviction notice. Property of Morales Family Trust. The official legal formatting. The specific language about unauthorized occupant. Diego pulled up his browser and typed Morales Family Trust property records with shaking fingers. The results loaded slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. The first result was from the county assessor's office. Property records for 1847 Sunset Ridge Drive. Owner of record, Morales Family Trust, established 2010. No transfer of ownership, no sale records. The property had been in the trust for 15 years. But that was impossible. He'd bought this house 3 years ago. He remembered the closing, signing the papers, getting the keys. He remembered his real estate agent congratulating him. Remembered the pride he'd felt walking through the door as the owner. He pulled up his email and searched for the closing documents. Found them. Opened the attachment. Started reading. The words swam before his eyes. Lease agreement. Long-term residential lease. Monthly payments to Sunset Property Management, LLC. Security deposit, terms and conditions. Not a purchase, a lease. He'd signed a lease, not a deed. Diego's legs gave out. He slid down the bare kitchen wall until he was sitting on the cold tile floor, his phone still clutched in his hand. How had he missed this? How had he not known? But he knew the answer. He'd been so excited, so eager to show off his success that he'd barely read the documents. His real estate agent had told him it was a great deal and he'd trusted her. He'd signed where she told him to sign, initialed where she told him to initial, never questioning, never verifying. And the agent. He tried to remember her name. Maria something. She'd been recommended by Isabella, he suddenly recalled. Said she was reliable, trustworthy, would get him the best deal. Isabella had recommended her. Diego's phone rang, making him jump. Unknown number. He answered it without thinking. "Mr. Rivera, this is Miguel Reyes, attorney representing the Morales Family Trust. I'm calling to confirm that you've received the eviction notice and to inform you that the property locks will be changed at 8:30 tomorrow morning. You have until that time to remove any personal belongings. A representative will be present to supervise and ensure that only items personally purchased by you with your own funds are removed from the premises. Wait, Diego said, his voice hoarse. Wait, you can't do this. This is my house. I've been paying for this house for 3 years. You've been paying rent on a lease, Mr. Rivera. The lease was month to month with a 30-day termination clause. Notice of termination was filed 32 days ago. You're currently occupying the property illegally. 32 days ago, I never received any notice. The notice was sent to the email address on file and posted at the property entrance. Your failure to see it doesn't negate its validity. Diego's mind reeled. 32 days ago. That would have been early January, right after New Year's. Right after he'd come home drunk from a party and told Isabella she was gaining weight, that she should be grateful he still found her attractive. This is insane, Diego said. Isabella put you up to this. This is revenge. This is a legal property matter, Mr. Rivera. Mrs. Morales has nothing to do with the trust's property management decisions. Mrs. Morales? Her name is Rivera. She's my wife. Mrs. Morales retained her family name, as is her legal right. And actually, as of 5 p.m. today, divorce proceedings have been initiated. You'll be served with papers tomorrow morning. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Diego. Divorce? She can't divorce me. She has nothing. She'll get nothing. I'd advise you to review your prenuptial agreement very carefully, Mr. Rivera, particularly sections 7 through 12 regarding infidelity, financial disclosure, and marital conduct. The prenup protects me. I made sure of that. Did you have your own attorney review it? Diego opened his mouth and closed it again. He'd had the prenup drawn up by a lawyer Isabella had suggested, someone she said specialized in family law. He'd glanced through it, seen language about protecting his business and assets, and signed it without getting a second opinion. That's what I thought, Miguel said. You'll find that the prenup is quite comprehensive in protecting Mrs. Morales' interests. Given your documented violations of the infidelity clause alone, you'll be fortunate to leave this marriage with the clothes on your back. Documented violations? What are you talking about? Your relationship with Carmen Torres has been thoroughly documented for the past 8 months. Hotels, restaurants, text messages, phone records. Miss Torres has been very cooperative in providing evidence. Diego felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Carmen? No, Carmen wouldn't. She's my girlfriend. Miss Torres is a contracted consultant who was compensated for gathering evidence of your extramarital activities. I believe the legal term is sting operation, though I prefer to think of it as investigative due diligence. The phone slipped from Diego's hand, clattering on the tile floor. Carmen had been working for Isabella. All those months of sympathy, of understanding, of making him feel desired and appreciated. It had all been an act, a paid performance. He picked up the phone with shaking hands. Miguel was still talking. Also be aware that your vehicle lease, which is through Premier Auto Leasing, a subsidiary of Morales Holdings, is being terminated effective end of business Friday. The vehicle must be returned to their downtown location by 5 p.m., or it will be reported as stolen. My car? You're taking my car? It's not your car, Mr. Rivera. It's a leased vehicle. The lease is being terminated per the terms of the agreement. I believe you'll find there's a clause about termination upon material breach of associated contracts. Diego couldn't breathe. His house wasn't his house. His car wasn't his car. His girlfriend wasn't his girlfriend. Everything he'd built his identity around was crumbling. I need to speak to Isabella, he said desperately. I need to talk to my wife. Mrs. Morales has instructed that all communication go through legal counsel. Any attempt to contact her directly will be considered harassment and will result in a restraining order. Do you understand, Mr. Rivera? This is insane. This is illegal. You can't just destroy someone's life like this. We're not destroying anything, Mr. Rivera. We're simply correcting a misunderstanding. You believed you had certain assets and certain relationships. You were mistaken. The correction of that mistake may feel destructive to you, but I assure you, everything we're doing is perfectly legal and meticulously documented. Who the hell is we? Who are you people? There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Miguel spoke again, his tone had shifted from professional to something almost pitying. Mr. Rivera, I suggest you spend this evening researching the Morales family. I think you'll find it educational. Good night. The line went dead. Diego sat on the cold kitchen floor in the dark, his mind refusing to process what was happening. Finally, with trembling fingers, he opened his browser again and typed Morales Family Trust. The results filled his screen: news articles, business journals, society page photos, each one a hammer blow to his understanding of reality. Morales Family real estate empire expands into 3 new markets. Elena Morales named Developer of the Year for 3rd consecutive year. Judge Ricardo Morales announces retirement after distinguished career. Morales Foundation pledges $50 million to educational initiatives. Diego clicked on an article from a business magazine dated 6 months ago. A photo loaded showing an elegant black woman in a designer suit standing in front of a downtown high-rise. The caption read, Elena Morales, CEO of Morales Holdings, oversees a real estate portfolio valued at over $300 million. He clicked on another link. A society page photo from a charity gala 2 years ago. A distinguished older black man in a tuxedo with his arm around the same elegant woman. Judge Ricardo and Elena Morales at the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser. The Morales Foundation donated $2 million to the new pediatric wing. Another link. This one from a real estate journal. Second generation takes the helm. The Morales children step into leadership roles. The article featured photos of 3 people. A man identified as Mateo Morales, CFO. A woman identified as Sofia Morales, Director of Marketing and Public Relations. And in the center, a photo that made Diego's blood run cold. Isabella, his wife, his supposedly unemployed, supposedly poor wife, wearing a charcoal suit and standing in a corporate boardroom. The caption read, Isabella Morales, Chief Operating Officer, manages day-to-day operations of the family's extensive holdings. Chief Operating Officer, $300 million portfolio. Foundation donations in the millions. Diego scrolled frantically through article after article, photo after photo, each one showing him a world he'd never known existed. Isabella at ribbon-cutting ceremonies for new developments. Isabella speaking at business conferences. Isabella accepting awards for community investment and sustainable development. And in every photo, she looked nothing like the quiet, modest woman he'd married. She looked powerful, confident, completely in control. He thought back to their relationship, searching for clues he'd missed. Her nonprofit job that she'd left shortly after they married. Her daily routine that he'd never bothered to ask about. Her visits to her mother's house that sometimes lasted all day. Her volunteer work that took her out of town for days at a time. She'd been working, running a business empire, managing hundreds of millions in assets. And he'd thought she was unemployed. Diego's phone buzzed with an email notification. He opened it with numb fingers. The subject line read, Contract Termination Notice. Dear Mr. Rivera, this letter is to inform you that effective immediately, Cortez Development Group has terminated its contract with Rivera Property Management. As per Section 12 of our agreement, termination may occur at any time for any reason with written notice. Please consider this your written notice. All outstanding invoices will be paid within 30 days. We wish you well in your future endeavors. Another email came through, then another, all from major clients, all terminating their contracts, all using nearly identical language. Diego pulled up his business banking app. His accounts were still accessible, but the projected revenue for the next quarter had just dropped by 70%. Without these contracts, Rivera Property Management was operating at a massive loss. Another email. This one from his largest investor. Diego, I'm sorry to do this via email, but I wanted to give you a heads up before the official notice comes through tomorrow. I'm pulling my investment from RPM. It's nothing personal, just a business decision. The market's changing, and I need to reallocate my capital. Best of luck. Diego called him immediately. It rang twice before going to voicemail. He tried another investor. Same result. A third. The man actually answered, but claimed he was in a meeting and would call back later. He wouldn't call back. None of them would. Diego sat in the darkness of the empty house that wasn't his house, holding the phone that would soon be his only possession, and tried to understand how his life had collapsed so completely in a matter of hours. This morning, he'd been Diego Rivera, successful property manager, owner of a mansion, driver of a luxury car, man in control of his world. He'd thrown his wife out of his house, secure in the knowledge that she had nothing and nowhere to go. Now, as midnight approached, he was Diego Rivera, renter facing eviction, lessee of a repossessed vehicle, betrayed by a girlfriend who'd never been his girlfriend, watching his business circle the drain, and married to a woman he'd never actually known at all. A woman who, it turned out, owned more in a single building than he'd earned in his entire lifetime. A woman who'd been playing a completely different game than he'd even known existed. A woman who'd just systematically dismantled his entire life with what appeared to be minimal effort and maximum efficiency. Diego pulled up Isabella's number on his phone. His finger hovered over the call button. Miguel had warned him not to contact her, had threatened a restraining order, but surely she'd answer. Surely she'd be willing to talk, to explain, to work something out. They'd been married for 3 years. That had to count for something. He pressed call. The phone rang once before an automated message played. The number you have reached is no longer in service. She'd changed her number. Diego tried texting. The message showed as undelivered. He was blocked. In desperation, he pulled up her social media profiles. All of them were set to private, and he was no longer on her friends list. It was like she'd erased him from her life with the push of a button. Because she had. Diego's phone buzzed with one final email. This one from his building management company. Dear Mr. Rivera, we regret to inform you that due to recent changes in our client portfolio and associated conflicts of interest, we can no longer provide property management services for your business. Please make arrangements to transfer your accounts to another management company within 30 days. The building where his office was located. He pulled up the lease documents. Managed by Sunset Property Management, LLC. The same company that managed the house he'd thought he owned. The same company that was undoubtedly owned by Morales Holdings. They owned his office building. They owned his house. They owned his car. They'd owned his major clients. They'd owned his investors. They'd owned his girlfriend. They owned everything. And by they, Diego was beginning to understand he really meant Isabella, or rather, Isabella's family. The family he'd dismissed as poor. The family he'd pitied. The family he'd condescended to for 3 solid years. The family that, with a few phone calls and some strategic document filing, had reduced his entire life to rubble. Diego stood up slowly, his legs stiff from sitting on the cold floor. He walked through the empty house, his footsteps echoing in the darkness. Room after empty room, space after hollow space. All of it stripped away, revealing the truth underneath. This had never been his house, just like the car had never been his car. And the success had never been his success. He'd been living in a carefully constructed illusion, and the moment he'd pushed too hard, the moment he'd finally crossed a line Isabella wouldn't tolerate, she'd simply stopped maintaining the illusion. And without that illusion, he had nothing. He was nothing. Diego walked out the front door of the empty mansion and sat on the steps, looking out at the manicured lawn that would soon belong to someone else. The night was clear and cold, stars visible despite the city lights. Everything looked the same as it always had, but nothing was the same at all. His phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. This is Carmen. I wanted to apologize for deceiving you, but also to thank you. The Morales Foundation is paying for my law school, and I started a top firm after graduation. I hope you understand it was nothing personal, just business. I do genuinely hope you land on your feet. Diego stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. Nothing personal, just business. The same thing all his investors had said, the same professional courtesy they all extended while systematically destroying him. He sat on the steps of a house that wasn't his and wouldn't be his come tomorrow morning, and finally allowed himself to understand the full scope of his miscalculation. He hadn't married a poor woman from a struggling family. He'd married into one of the wealthiest, most connected families in the state. And instead of recognizing his incredible fortune, instead of treating his wife with respect and dignity, instead of being grateful for the opportunity to be part of something larger than himself, he'd spent 3 years making her feel small. He'd mocked her family, dismissed her work, belittled her intelligence, controlled her movements, undermined her confidence, and finally thrown her bodily out of a house that had never belonged to him in the first place. And she'd let him. For 3 years, she'd let him believe his own fiction. She'd played the role of the grateful, powerless wife, probably hoping he'd eventually show her who he really was underneath the arrogance. He had shown her, and she'd responded by showing him the truth. Diego Rivera sat on those steps until dawn, watching the sky lighten, knowing that when the sun fully rose, a representative from the Morales Family Trust would arrive to change the locks and escort him from the premises. He had about 6 hours to figure out where he was going to go and how he was going to rebuild a life from nothing. Because Isabella had taken everything else, but she'd left him one gift: the truth. The clear, undeniable, devastating truth about who he was and what he'd lost. And unlike the house and the car and the business and the girlfriend, that was something he was going to have to live with forever. Diego spent the night in his office, which suddenly seemed like borrowed space, tainted by the knowledge that even this small corner of professional territory was connected to the Morales empire. He'd driven there in the Mercedes at 3 in the morning, unable to bear another moment sitting on the steps of the empty mansion, and had slumped in his desk chair trying to make sense of the wreckage. By 8 a.m., when his assistant Maria arrived, he looked like he'd been through a war. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his usually carefully styled hair falling across his forehead. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the hours searching the internet, piecing together a picture of the family he'd married into and somehow never actually seen. Mr. Rivera? Maria stood in the doorway, concern evident on her face. Are you all right? You look terrible. I'm fine, Diego lied. Just a long night. Can you get me some coffee? Of course. She hesitated. Sir, there's a courier here with some documents that require your signature. He says they're urgent. Diego's stomach dropped. Send him in. The courier was professional and efficient, handing Diego a thick manila envelope and a tablet for signature confirmation. Diego signed without looking at the young man's face, unable to bear the possibility of seeing pity or judgment there. After the courier left, Diego opened the envelope. Divorce petition, just as Miguel had promised. The paperwork was extensive, professionally prepared, and absolutely devastating. He forced himself to read through it carefully this time, not skimming, not assuming, actually reading every word. The prenuptial agreement was attached, and as he went through it line by line, he felt physically sick. The agreement he'd thought protected his assets actually did the opposite. It outlined in meticulous detail the separation of property, with everything he'd assumed was jointly owned clearly designated as belonging to Isabella or the Morales family trust. The house, the cars, even some of the furniture in his office. He realized with growing horror was listed as property of Morales Holdings, loaned for professional use. And there in Section 9 was the infidelity clause. Any extramarital relationship would result in forfeiture of any claim to shared assets and would disqualify him from spousal support. Documentation of such relationships would be considered sufficient evidence without need for further proof. The next section of the envelope contained that documentation. Photos of him and Carmen at restaurants, hotels, walking hand in hand. Credit card receipts, text messages. Carmen's signed statement, clinical and detailed, outlining the exact nature of their relationship and confirming it had been ongoing for 8 months. 8 months. Nearly a third of the time he'd been certain his marriage was solid, certain he had control. Carmen had been building a case against him. Maria returned with coffee, took one look at the documents spread across his desk and quietly set the cup down and left without a word. Diego's phone rang. Another investor. Diego, hey, I wanted to call before you heard it from someone else. I'm pulling my money from RPM. It's not personal, buddy. Just business realities. The market's shifting and I need to diversify my portfolio. Let me guess, Diego said, his voice flat. Someone recommended you diversify. There was a pause. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Someone, maybe someone connected to the Morales family, suggested that your investment in my company was no longer a sound financial decision. Another pause, longer this time. Diego, I don't know what's going on with you in your personal life, but yeah. I've been hearing some things, and when I hear that kind of thing about someone I'm invested with, I get nervous. So, yeah, I'm pulling out. I suggest you don't make it difficult. The line went dead. Diego pulled up his business accounts again. 3 more termination notices had arrived overnight. By his calculation, without these contracts and without investor capital, Rivera Property Management would be insolvent within 45 days, maybe 60 if he cut every possible expense and worked miracles. He didn't believe in miracles anymore. His phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Settlement meeting 10 a.m., Whitmore and Associates Law Offices. Diego looked at the time. 9:15. He had 45 minutes to get across town to a meeting he absolutely did not want to attend but knew he couldn't avoid. He stood, grabbed his jacket and caught a glimpse of himself in the office mirror. He looked haunted, broken, Good, he thought bitterly. At least his appearance matched his reality. The law offices of Whitmore and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of one of the most prestigious buildings downtown. Diego had been here once before, years ago, for a business consultation. Then,